I'm excited to talk about our ongoing journey with commercialization of Optimistic today. And I wanted to focus on our STTR application and the STTR SBIR process for this particular talk. A few acknowledgements, disclosures. So I'll talk about Care Revolution, but I am the founder and the CEO of Care Revolution. I'll mention Chris Parmalee, the grant writer I worked with in developing the STTR, and I will credit her with significant material in these slides. I'm not going to focus on, although certainly happy to talk about how else we've gotten support for Care Revolution, but certainly want to acknowledge the IU Venture Philanthropic Fund, the IU Forces Grant, as well as Regenstrief. So I'll do very brief background on Optimistic. I've had the opportunity to talk about our larger work with Optimistic before up here. So it'll just be very brief. Again, can talk about that all day, so I can answer any questions about it. We'll talk about this grant mechanism, our proposal, the critiques we got and how we responded, and how it fits into the larger picture of commercialization. So Optimistic. Optimistic is funded through a $30.3 million contract with the CMS Center for Innovation. So it's a big project. In Optimistic, nurses and nurse practitioners are trained and embedded in nursing facilities in central Indiana to deliver a suite of evidence-based interventions that enhance clinical care and our primary outcome, reduce potentially avoidable hospitalizations. And it worked. So just cutting right to the punchline, it worked. It demonstrated through external evaluation published in Health Affairs that both quality and costs can be improved in the nursing home setting, which is a particularly difficult setting to intervene in. And, you know, in the first 4 years, so phase 1 of Optimistic, we served over 6,000 residents of nursing facilities, reduced all-cause hospitalizations by 19%, and reduced potentially avoidable hospitalizations by a third compared to control facilities in Indiana. So all that has caused us to be thinking about a pivot and what life after Optimistic looks like. Now, Optimistic is ongoing through September of 2020. And that gives us the opportunity to keep working on it, to keep refining our clinical model and to test, and what really phase 2 is about is testing new Medicare Part B codes in these facilities. So we've gotten to expand our network to 40 facilities across the state, get involved in financial policy reform, and also keep fine-tuning that clinical model and keep the wonderful infrastructure we have around Optimistic in terms of our staff, clinically and research staff. So we started thinking about this early, kind of kicked a little bit by a senior project officer at the Hartford Foundation, because we early on were having successes, certainly in implementation, in stakeholder engagement, and also we're in this environment where hospitalization rates, reducing hospitalizations, has only become more pressing and salient over time. In fact, now in just the last few months, nursing homes are directly penalized based on their hospitalization rates financially. So we were thinking about sustainability fairly early on in phase 1. And we did, in fact, get a Hartford Foundation dissemination planning grant. And it was about $600,000. We spent that money doing a qualitative evaluation of our model, doing an environmental survey, trying to inform a business case and early business plan development. I say early because we did business plan development and ended up scrapping most of it and have continued to iterate on it. But that's what we were able to get started on. We also had a national stakeholder advisory board who was engaged in helping us think through it. And we did a lot of, pros and cons and thinking about what does the organizational infrastructure need to look like so that Optimistic can continue beyond this funded contract. And we thought a lot about the pros and cons of being structured as a for-profit entity, as a not-for-profit entity, or should we have an account within IU and do consulting work through that account and not need to spin off a separate entity. And there are pros and cons to these models, and there are examples of these models on campus. So, so through the Hartford grant and then just individually spent a lot of time trying to learn the choices different people had made here and at other institutions along those lines. And then we also had support from the IURTC office. And IURTC is IU's tech transfer office, and they exist to provide resources to help commercialize products that have IU intellectual property. And some people may have worked with them more. And so certainly if anything I say along these lines, you can add additional detail, please feel free to as I get through this. But the support that we got from IURTC, and it took a while because we're a little different. I mean, we're not a drug or a device. And so it's in terms of packaging us and selling our clinical model, what we have, that took work and a lot of discussions. But what we got and I continue to get from them that has been of substantial benefit is business development expertise and also grant writing support, because we quickly really, as we were going through this, identified that this SBIR or an STTR mechanism presents great opportunity for us and is a logical next step to fund the next work that is needed to commercialize what we've done in Optimistic. And so it was in the context of, all right, now we're going to apply for this. We need to have our business entity that we did found, Care Revolution. So Care Revolution is dedicated to revolutionizing care of nursing home patients. So it was founded by me and others on our team contributing, as well as support from IURTC. And the intent of the business is to commercialize the tools and methods developed in the Optimistic demonstration project to enhance quality of care, reduce unnecessary transfers, and decrease costs of care by giving facilities the clinical support they need to treat sick people in place. So to focus on these mechanisms now, SBIR and STTR, they can be thought of as the same in general, and then I will talk about the nuances between them, but they're essentially, intended to serve the same purpose. And it's not just the NIH, so multiple agencies offer SBIR and STTR grants. So CDC, FDA, NSF has a large SBIR, STTR program, Department of Defense. So they're designed to stimulate R&D, innovation, and commercialization of new technologies. And there are more than 5,500 awards a year, totaling more than 2.5 billion. And I mean, they are intended explicitly to stimulate growth in our economy and grow small businesses. So to be eligible for an SBIR, you have to be a small business, which is defined as 500 or fewer employees, including affiliates. You must be a for-profit business and located and primarily operated in the US. And the PI's primary employment for an SBIR has to be with the business at the time of funding. And so you could write into the proposal, if this is funded, then I will be in the business. You can make that transition at that time when funded, but that has to be explicitly the plan if you go for the SBIR. And so the key the point I wanted to make is Care Revolution, or your business, is the applicant for SBIR or STTR, and then you have subcontracts to the research institution partners. And so it's conceptualized as a three-step program, with phase 1 and phase 2 being the steps, the phases that the STTR SBIR directly supports. So phase 1, these are smaller grants. An STTR is a year, SBIRs are often shorter. It's about feasibility. It says 150K, but there's certainly some flexibility there. And then phase 2 is, potentially larger prototype development, and these are bigger grants. $1 million to $1.5 million or even more can be requested. And again, these grants go to the business, and they are usually closer to 2 years in length. So there are 11 federal agencies who do these grants, 36 separate solicitations, and this is 2015 data. Over 17,000 Phase 1 proposals were received, and 2,880 Phase 1 awards were made. So even though it's smaller than 500 employees, 40% of the companies are really small, have between 2 and 9 employees, and Care Revolution would fall in that much smaller category. And you know, this is I've talked to people who've sat on these study sections, and they get a lot of proposals that aren't very good, because they get proposals from businesses who don't know how to write NIH grants, and then they get proposals from academics who don't understand the language and the processes needed for commercialization. And so it's pretty straightforward to triage a lot of them, is what I've heard. The overall award rate in 2015 for Phase 1 was 17%. Actually, hit rates are pretty high right now at the National Institute on Aging if your proposal is related to Alzheimer's disease or related dementias. And then the rigorous review process, that's the standard NIH study section process. But some Indiana-specific data that I wanted to share from 2016 to 2018. And I know there are people in this room. Actually, can you raise your hand if you've applied for an SBIR or STTR? Because I know. Okay, so there's certainly people, and I know we have a few in IUCAR, who either have led applications or come in on the research partner side of them. So over these most recent 2 years, there were 65 SBIRs and 19 Phase 1 STTR awards. The SBIR program is substantially bigger than the STTR program. It's more money, more applications. The hit rates are fairly similar, I've heard, but SBIR is bigger. So in order to go for this mechanism, you have to have your for-profit small business or small business partner, and you have to really need to do something new. That's innovative, that you're proposing something new you're going to build, test, or do. You have to have commercial potential. You have to be able to tell that story, that there really is a market out there for what you are doing. And then you have to tell the story of this phase development. You're writing an application for Phase 1, but you have to at least say, and then in Phase 2 we'll do these couple things, and kind of tell that story so it fits in. And then, this kind of maybe sounds small, but if it's your own business, you have to submit. You don't have, the infrastructure we are used to and we rely on when we're doing grants and contracts of our budget, folks at IU and at Regenstrief. And so you need help to figure out how to get your DUNS number, get register everything, and submit it. So SBIR and STTR. So the SBIR does not require a research institution, but permits a research institution as a partner. And again, the PI has to sit on that side, at least when it's funded. And then most of the work, 2/3 of the work, must be done on the business side. And so the budget has to reflect that. And again, they're usually shorter. So STTR is what we did, and that requires a research institution as a partner. And the PI is able to sit on the research institution side. And then 40% of the work has to be on the business side, and you have a year. I think that this is just making the point of where the PI needs to sit. So I don't think we need to get into too many of those details, although happy to answer questions. So again, SBIR, much larger program, but there are reasons why STTRs can be good fit mechanisms, especially for people like us, for people who work in Regenstrief or institutes like ours. So it's natural. It allows for continued development within a university lab. So it like for us, it felt like this fit as a next logical step. And it allows university faculty to not have to take a leave of absence, because that's what you'd need to do if you're going to be 51% employed by your business. And then you have access to university resources. So certainly in our application, we talk about IURTC and about leveraging, the existing optimistic demonstration project. So you still have to have someone on the company side, at least someone, and the company still has to be big enough to be able to deliver some of this work. So when we thought about what is it that we need to commercialize Optimistic, software rose to the top of our list. Optimistic is this clinical care model, these well-trained nurses embedded in the nursing facility who are then carefully and closely managed, by clinical nurse managers. And what we felt that the technology software could offer is supporting fidelity to our approach. So our protocols that are paper-based, creating more of a clinical decision support framework, and also, and then knowing that they're actually using it without us having to be there so closely monitoring, reinforcing the training, and particularly as we think about having 10 Optimistic Now Care Revolution nurses in Iowa and 12 in Ohio, et cetera. So the title of our application is Leveraging Technology to Improve Care, the Optimistic Interface. And then I will share our journey. So we submitted in April 2018, and Care Revolution, the business, was founded the month before. We got a disappointing score, which was such a bummer because of the pay lines and the receptivity to applications that have to do with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, which certainly applies to a nursing home population. So we were surprised and disappointed by our score. So we immediately started working on our resubmission, fixing the problems, which I'll talk about, the critiques, and we submitted that in September. But simultaneously, really starting in early August, so we're trying to finish up this resubmission, but in early August, the NIH started to reach out in an increasing fever pitch, wanting a response to reviewers, just-in-time documentation. We'd get an email, we need full financials of your company for the last year in 24 hours, just all kinds of documentation. At one point, the project officer said, "Did you get your notice of award yet?" But despite all that, apparently we didn't quite make the cut. We weren't funded. So we were very glad we had resubmitted. The resubmission score is improved, that we got late fall, but it's still disappointing, even though they stated you were very responsive to the reviewers. So then got the project officer on the phone. He said, "I think this is dead." But then 2 weeks ago, we got asked for a response to the reviewers, which we were able to do very well because there really weren't a lot of critiques. So it's still out there. That's where we are to date. The substance of it is to develop this prototype, this clinical decision support prototype, so that to a level that can be tested. Again, this is feasibility and early prototype development, which is the scope of this type of an award, and what you can do with that amount of money. So it would be used by nurses, Optimistic trained nurses, as a clinical decision support to assess a changing condition of a nursing home resident, prompt action, and record actions taken. So again, that's part of that fidelity monitoring piece of it. And then we were going to pilot test this, and this is the most recent iteration. Pilot test it using scenarios, clinical scenarios, and on tablets with both Optimistic nurses, but also some frontline nurses in nursing homes. Again, feasibility, usability, these are the outcomes. And then to iterate that over the time that we have. And then from an exploratory way, looking into linkages with facility EHRs, because the power of this tool will be when it is integrated with the facility EHR. That's when it will be useful enough to clinical staff that they will use it, and we will be able to convince them to work it into their workflow. When it both pulls data out that's useful at the bedside and then feeds what you've done back in to the medical record so that you don't have to write a separate note. Like that's where we're going. And we know enough to know that this is possible and that the largest players are engaging with developers, but it's outside the scope of a phase one. We did have to say what we would do in phase two, and so we talked much more about that aspect of it. The critiques. So the technology partner and expertise. So we worked with an outside developer group on our original STTR application, which we put together very quickly. When we got critiques about, we don't know that you really know this group, and we're, not sure that they really have a good healthcare track record. we replaced them with a Regenstrief software development team, which was very well received. And we also rounded our advisory board. Burke joined our advisory board. So in addition to the nursing home and implementation expertise, we had more clinical decision support and in-house software development for this prototype stage. There were also some concerns which weren't really well communicated from the project officer, but about testing in nursing homes with vulnerable patients. And because we operate in these facilities, already as the demo, I think we could have overcome that. We moved to scenario-based testing. The big critique we got this time was, well, you're just trying to replace your nurses with technology. Well, of course we're not going to do that. Like, that was just a total miss in how we communicated. And so that was our main response. And no, we think it can replace some of the management functions. And we've been doing better with demonstrating commercialization potential because of other activities we're doing with our startup business, Care Revolution. So we've been able to present that better. So we've not given up on SBIR, STTR, and it's still cooking, although it has a low likelihood of funding this particular resubmission, but we haven't given up. We actually were able to kick off some work. We have, I don't know if Madhura is here, I don't think I saw her, but Madhura Matri is a UX design graduate student on campus who joined our team last semester and was really able to do a lot of great preliminary work to inform this, including a lot of interviews with end users and content experts. And then she mapped out and mocked up what it could look like, which is also very cool. And then we could put screenshots into our resubmission. But I'm very excited that we are just going to proceed with this development work with Regenstrief support. So the Regenstrief portion that we described in the proposal, we have support now directly from Regenstrief to just get going with it, which will poise us well. So if we get funded with this resubmitted STTR, then we can expand the scope of what we're doing. And if we don't, fine, we're going to make enough progress that this fall, we're just going to go right to a direct phase 2, one of those larger awards. So I think we'll be well positioned for that. So that's very exciting. And just to share, what this is going to start looking like, again, Madhura, sketched out, sort of low fidelity prototypes and also something that looks a little, slicker, a little more real. So it's fun to see it coming together. So, these mechanisms do provide R&D support for directly to small businesses. The grant writing support was extremely helpful because this was a mechanism I was certainly unfamiliar with, and the grant has to be submitted through the business, and we don't have, the usual infrastructure support we're used to. Chris Parmalee is the grant writer I worked with, and she works with IURTC, and she was very helpful with this, so I wanted to acknowledge that. So I'll stop there. I only left 5 minutes, but I will stop there. So thank you. So if anyone wants to share about their experiences with SBIR, STTR, or critiques or concerns, that's something I thought we could have a little bit of conversation with at least. Yes, types.
So 2 questions, and then I'll tell you about our SBIR. You said you are the founder of the company. What is your stake in the company?
I'm the sole owner right now.
So you have 100% of the company?
Yes, right now.
Okay, congratulations. And how much did it cost you to get the consulting support for the grant? I know it's impolite to ask about money, but I thought it would be fine.
We're all friends. So IURTC is formally working with us. IURTC supported the grant writer. Okay. So we have an investment from IU Venture Philanthropic Fund. We have spent that money to hire Russ Evans, one of our lead nurses on Optimistic. He's the COO of the company. So we have an employee now through that support. And we've also used that money for lawyers because there's a lot of lawyers involved in all the paperwork and setting up the company. But the grant writer support came through IURTC, although she can be separately. Now I'm like, oh, do you do R01s too? So she can be retained separately as well.
So to our SBIR, which some of you know about, that's the work I'm doing at HC1. So you talked about the STTR mechanism that you used.
Yes.
With HC1, we had to use the SBIR mechanism because the work was going to be at the company. They had done all the preliminary stuff. And so the idea came from me. They actually didn't know about this program, but when they were starting their bigger work on the opiate epidemic, I said, well, this is a perfect topic for an SBIR. Just for you, for us, the same lesson, persistence pays off.
Yes.
We didn't get in on the first try. We improved our score in the second try, and we did get the award then from NIDA, so the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And one thing that one of the program officers said to me in the discussions after the review really stuck with me, and that was, if you can demonstrate how your tool measurably affects something in the opiate epidemic, you will have absolutely no trouble getting your phase 2 award. And so we're feverishly working on that, actually together with the Marion County Department of Health. They are our major, public health partner. And I'm hoping that in the fall, when the grant is over, that we can demonstrate some things there. In the larger sense, it has opened the mind of a company like HC1 to working with academicians. Mm-hmm. I was this foreign body in them, which was kind of, why are you here, mostly, type question.
What can you bring?
Yes, yeah. What can you bring? And as soon as I brought in $150,000, and in that quarter, I was like the major revenue generator, I have to point out. So suddenly, they were like, what other grants can we apply for? So they were like, well, whoa. But now they're actually a partner on the Addictions Grant Challenge phase 2 application that I have. So I got another award just a few months ago. So overall, one of the key lessons that you also implicitly gave was look for a variety of funding sources from a variety of different quarters, because otherwise you're not going to survive this.
Mike Weiner wasn't able to be here, but one thing that he asked is, how do you decide whether or not to partner in these? The SBIRs he'd been involved in are similar to others that I've heard people talk about, where they get approached by a business who's just trying to find a research partner to, help them study what they're doing. And I think we do have to carefully evaluate those options to see if it makes sense and fits in with our larger research goals, or if it advances a strategic partnership. I mean, for us, it's all us. I mean, this is our work that we are trying to commercialize, and it supports it. So it was more straightforward. So. Thank you.
But I have a bunch of stuff. So I'll start by saying some of what my experience was. We submitted an STTR. We formed, similar to your story, we formed business, submitted an STTR. We used Chris Parmalee. She was terrific. And we got turned down on our submission, first and second submission. And I was trying to be very sensitive to what you had said about the, beanie-headed academicians writing things with no business sense, or business people writing things with no academic sense. And I actually went through a small business accelerator and learned all about starting small businesses and all that sort of stuff. And the first STTR I wrote was really all about taking a pretty mature, functional, well-demonstrated, well-funded system and commercializing it, and all the steps we'd have to go through to make it a commercially viable product. And the number one critique we got was, where's the innovation? Because somehow the system itself being innovative wasn't enough. The grant had to have some new innovation. So then we rewrote it and dumped a bunch of the business stuff and, we're going to run a demonstration trial and do all these innovative improvements, and then that got turned down too. So I just wanted to put out that caution.
Right,
it's a little bit of a moving target, and grants don't get funded. You have to prepare for disappointment. So that was, I'll just I'll end that story. That's probably enough for now about that story. But I wanted to ask you about you have gracefully avoided involving any venture capital in your work. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about diluting your ownership in the company in order to get funded and really launch the thing.
Oh, no, I mean, and that is the plan. I mean, we're just an early stage startup. Right now, and so that's one reason the grant, the STTR SBIR is so attractive. That's undiluted funds. I mean, they're just giving you money to grow your business, do R&D, because when you get investors, they are investing for a stake in your company. And the Venture Philanthropic Fund is structured in that way such that when we do offer stock, they will convert their investment to an ownership interest. So maybe I don't want to undercount that, but that, of course, is an IU-related venture fund. So absolutely, when we are ready to when we have more in terms of the prototype and we've developed our commercialization strategy further, we will be doing that, and my ownership stake will be greatly diluted, I hope, with all the investment that we get. I mean, that's the choice about being a for-profit entity, is the opportunity to raise capital. I mean, that's why to do it. Otherwise, as a not-for-profit, you are focused on finding philanthropic and grant support. And actually, we can't, which I actually didn't fully appreciate, accept a grant from, say, a not-for-profit entity unless it's for services as a for-profit entity. But the NIH plays by its own rules, so that's separate. So they can give us a grant. Again, lawyers, lots of lawyers explaining these nuances. So, well, thank you guys so much.